Buddha taught as follows: those who complain about other people's problems only accumulate troubles. Those who focus only on the problems of others and complain about them only accumulate more troubles and spread their negative karma not only to themselves, but also to those around them. He also taught, if you don't look inside yourself, you will never be able to see your own inner self. He also says, do not associate with those who do not look inside themselves, who turn their eyes away from the psychology of their own mind. Keep your distance from those who are lazy and unwilling to look into their own hearts. It is important to be with those who have a clear mind. Have you ever had this experience in your daily life? A colleague at work is always bad-mouthing someone else. Someone is abnormally polite in front of his boss, but cold toward his subordinates. There is an acquaintance who seems to secretly rejoice when he hears about someone's misfortune. Buddha's words resonate deeply in our daily lives even today, more than 2,500 years later. The essence of the human heart may change over time, but it will remain the same. We need to be especially careful in our dealings with those who, as the Buddha warns, do not look into their own hearts, but always look for the faults of others and criticize them. Such people are unaware of their own instincts and continue to exert their negative influence on those around them. So what exactly are the characteristics of people who, according to the teachings of the Buddha, should be cautious in their dealings with those who are caught up in their own worldly desires? In this Dharma talk, I would like to explain the characteristics of people to watch out for that we encounter in our daily lives based on ancient Buddhist wisdom. This is not to judge or criticize others. Rather, I hope you will take it as wisdom to protect your own mind and build better relationships with others. The characteristics discussed here may also be latent in our own hearts at times. I hope you will listen to this talk as an opportunity to look into your own heart. Let's take a look at some specific characteristics. 1. Disagreement of personalities. Those who change their attitude, depending on their position or other people. Do you know someone like this around you? A person who bows his head and uses polite language in front of his superior, but has an overbearing attitude towards subordinates. The person who smiles at customers, but shows a cold attitude toward young part-time workers. The person who posts loving words on social networking sites, while verbally abusing family members. People who change their attitude extremely, depending on the other person's position, have long been regarded as people to be wary of. Why do people use different attitudes? At the root of this attitude is a mind that always puts one's own interests first. We show a good image to our superiors for promotion, to our customers for evaluation, and to our reputation on social networking sites. However, for those who are in a weaker position than oneself, there is no need to worry about such appearances, and thus the original arrogant nature comes out. The Buddha likened associating with those whose minds are clouded to that of muddy water muddying clear water. You must be careful in your dealings with such people, even if they are nice to you. Now, you never know when their attitude will change. However, avoid hating or criticizing such a person. It is important to treat them with compassion as human beings, who also suffer from afflictions. At the same time, it is necessary to maintain an appropriate distance. Do not condemn the other person, but maintain a peaceful relationship with him or her without going too deeply into the matter. This is the practice of the middle way as taught by Buddhism. 2. Blame and slander. Those who always speak ill of others. The Buddha specifically warns against speaking ill of others as a form of verbal abuse. Have you ever encountered such situations in your daily life? A person who always gossips about someone during break time, an acquaintance who says she is doing it for that person's sake, but actually seems to enjoy exposing the other person's faults. A friend who always complains about his boss or colleagues whenever she meets them. At first glance, this may seem like mere chatter or stress relief. However, in Buddhism, bad-mouthing others is considered a manifestation of serious afflictions. Why is this? It is because by pointing out the faults of others, we are distracting ourselves from the darkness in our own hearts. The more eager you are to find fault with others, the less you are able to face your own inner self. There is a Buddhist analogy that says, the faults of others are as visible as the dust in front of us, but our own faults are as hard to notice as the great baggage behind us. A person who constantly speaks ill of others is unaware of the weight of his or her own baggage. In addition, The act of swearing not only clouds the mind of the person who speaks, but also the mind of the listener. Once you hear a bad word, you may change the way you look at that person, and the cloudiness will spread to other people. The important thing to remember when dealing with such people is to avoid getting involved in the circle of bad-mouthing. Don't agree with what they say, but don't deny it either. Above all, when you are tempted to speak ill of others, think of it as a chance to reflect on your own mind. When we see the faults of others, it is often a mirror of our own issues. 3. Meritorious charity. Something that does not help without something in return. Regarding good deeds, the Buddha teaches that charity that demands something in return is not true charity. Are there any such people around you? At a neighborhood association cleanup, someone who diligently cleans only when the board members are watching. At a temple event, someone who acts kindly only in front of the head priest. The person who becomes enthusiastic about taking care of his or her parents as soon as there is talk of inheritance. At work, a senior who foolishly mentors new employees when the boss is not looking. These people are characterized by a single point of reference for all their actions. How much is in it for them? When the elderly lady next door is sick, they pretend not to know as soon as they learn that they cannot expect anything in return. Even when they see someone in need, if they see no benefit to themselves, they will pass by. There is an old saying, kindness is good for no one. This is the teaching that being kind to others will eventually benefit you. However, those who seek reward in return misunderstand the essence of this saying. They seek only immediate reward and lose the true richness of their hearts. Good deeds and kindness are not originally done with the expectation of receiving something in return. Jizzo is not watching over passers-by expecting someone to praise him. What is important when dealing with such people is not to be misled by makeshift good deeds. Don't get too caught up in past events that were kind to you at the time, but have an eye for the person's true intentions in the present. It is also important to reflect on our own conduct. When we are kind to others, do we expect something in return? Let us ask ourselves what true compassion is. 4. Pride, one who always tries to gain the upper hand. The Buddha taught, egotism and conceit are the two most troublesome afflictions that cloud the mind. Have you ever encountered such situations in your daily life? Every time you go home to your parents' house, an elderly relative denies the hardships of the younger generation, saying, "It was harder in my time." An acquaintance who interrupts every time someone speaks at a tea ceremony, saying, "I know more about this than you do." When the next-door neighbor buys a new car, the person says proudly, "Oh, our car is better than yours." Parents always want to compare their children's school events with our children's school events. In this way, there are people who always try to show their superiority. This is the very kind of pride that Buddhism teaches us about. Why do people take this attitude? In fact, at the root of this attitude is a deep insecurity. They want to be recognized for their own worth, and they want to prove that they are not inferior to others. There is a saying, "A frog in a well does not know the ocean." People who hold their own superiority may actually be unaware of how small their world is, just like this frog. When dealing with such a person, it is best to quietly let his or her words pass without reacting to them. If you show a competitive attitude, it will only reinforce the other person's conceited attitude. And sometimes, we need to reflect on our own hearts. When you listen to someone else's story, do you ever feel that your mind is filled with the thought, "I'm better than he is"? That's when you have a chance to regain a humble heart. 5. Falsehood, one who speaks only in flattery. The Buddha taught, untruthful words cloud the minds of those who speak them, and the minds of those who hear them. Have you ever encountered such a person in your daily life? The person who, at a Buddhist memorial service at the temple, shows an excessive amount of emotion when the head priest speaks. The person who praises the wife across the street for her kimono more than she actually wears it. The relative who suddenly becomes polite only when you ask him or her for something. A person who shows an unusually submissive attitude in front of the president at a senior citizens association meeting. There are people who use flattery to put others in a good mood. At first glance, this may seem like mere social pleasantries or a lubricant for smooth human relations. However, in Buddhism, untruthful words are considered a serious mistake. Why is this? It is because the falsehood of flattery leads the speaker's mind toward falsehood and clouds the listener's mind as well. It has been said since ancient times that words of advice that hurt the ear are medicine. while words that are pleasant to the ear are poison. We should be especially careful when flattery appears under the guise of kindness or compassion. However, there is always a calculation lurking behind it, always trying to get something out of it. This kind of relationship is never healthy. When dealing with such people, it is important to have an eye for the other person's true intentions, rather than being happy or sad about what they say on the spot. It is necessary to have a comet's eye to see through the calculating intentions that lie behind warm words. And let us also look back at ourselves. When you talk to people, do you use more flattery than necessary? We should keep in mind that words of truth are the bridge that truly connects the hearts of people. 6. One who rejoices in the misfortune of others. The Buddha lists the mind that cannot rejoice in the happiness of others, and the mind that rejoices in their misfortune as the deepest affliction. Have you ever encountered such a situation in your daily life? When your neighbor's house burns down in a fire, the person secretly rejoices that it is natural because that house was so vain. A parent who gloats when they hear that their classmate's child has failed an entrance exam, even though they were so overbearing. When a long-time store closes its doors, the person who looks on coldly saying, "The owner wasn't very friendly." In this way, the mind that takes secret pleasure in the misfortunes of others may actually be lurking in everyone's heart. However, this is considered the most serious affliction. Why is this so? It is because the mind that rejoices in the misfortune of others is the most deeply damaging to one's own mind. There is a saying, other people's misfortune is the taste of honey, but that honey is actually a deadly poison. The old saying goes, compassion is not for other people. This is a teaching that compassion for others goes around and enriches one's own heart. On the contrary, a heart that rejoices in the misfortune of others will impoverish one's own heart. A heart that can honestly rejoice in the happiness of others, and a heart that has deep compassion for those who are unhappy, is the kind of heart we should strive for. When we feel joy at the misfortune of others, it is a chance to examine our own hearts. The first step to purification of the mind is to recognize the feelings of insecurity and jealousy that are deep within us. Chapter 2, Coping Wisdom. So far, we have discussed 6 characteristics of people obsessed with vexations. How, then, should we relate to these people? The Buddha taught that all people have the Buddha nature. In other words, no matter how much a person is caught up in worldly desires, there is always a pure heart sleeping within him or her. At the same time, however, it is important to maintain an appropriate distance, as in the analogy of getting too close and getting burned. Here, let us discuss 3 practical tips. 1. Take the middle way, keep the proper distance. The Buddha taught that both attachment and denial create suffering. This teaching is also an important guideline. In our relationships with people who are highly vexatious, it is undesirable to both completely sever a relationship and to become too deeply involved. For example, if you are in a professional relationship, limit yourself to essential duties. If you are neighbors, keep your relationship to a simple greeting. In this way, it is important to build a peaceful relationship with others while maintaining an appropriate distance. 2. Remember to be compassionate and move from criticism to understanding. It is said, the good medicine to eliminate resentment is compassion. Even if someone is being unreasonable, avoid hating or criticizing that person. That person is just another human being, suffering from the burden of afflictions. Rather, have a heart that understands the other person's suffering. This does not mean that you approve of the other person's actions. There is a difference between understanding and tolerating. 3. Protecting the self. Maintain a clean mind. It is especially important to protect your own mind when dealing with people who are highly vexed. If you feel upset by the other person's words or actions, take a deep breath to calm your mind. If you feel your mind is about to be disturbed, meditate to purify your mind. Another important way to protect yourself is to keep yourself in fellowship with people who have pure hearts. In this article, I have discussed the characteristics of people who are trapped by vexations and how to deal with them. In closing, let me remind you of an important teaching of the Buddha. One who cannot look into his own heart cannot understand the hearts of others. He who cannot look into his own heart cannot understand the heart of another. We often tend to focus on the worries and shortcomings of others. However, such times may be a chance to reflect on our own hearts. For example, when we are offended by someone's attitude Are we not also taking the same attitude somewhere else? When you are bothered by someone's bad words, do you find yourself making the same kind of criticism? When you are tired of other people's compliments, do you use similar words yourself? In this way, all the various situations we encounter in our daily lives are important opportunities to improve our own hearts and minds. Since ancient times, there has been an analogy of the moon moving on water. A beautiful moon is reflected on the surface of quiet water. However, if the surface of the water is wavy, the moon will appear distorted or not reflect at all. The same is true of our hearts. If our mind is calm, we can correctly understand the true nature of others. However, if our mind is swayed by vexations, we lose sight of the truth of things. Therefore, when you notice someone's vexations, start by adjusting your own mind. As the saying goes, all things change. Both people's minds and relationships are constantly changing. A person who is deeply troubled today may regain a pure heart tomorrow. Today's difficult relationship may turn into a good relationship tomorrow. The important thing is to never lose hope and to keep practicing daily. Thank you for watching to the end. Please subscribe to our channel if you like. Let's continue to adopt Buddha's wisdom and make our lives more radiant and happy.